Tonight on NewsWatch, another polar plunge. Temperatures are dropping again. We'll show you just how low they're expected to go. Plus, International Holocaust Remembrance Day, how Israel and the world commemorate the tragedy. And see how a new documentary is helping to free young women from sexual slavery. All this and more tonight on NewsWatch. Good evening, I'm Mark Martin. Another Arctic blast means freezing temperatures for residents in at least 18 states. The polar plunge is sending frigid air meant for the North Pole much further south, clear to the Gulf Coast. It's creating havoc for students, parents, drivers, and just about everyone. John Waggy has more in tonight's top story.
In northern states such as North Dakota, drifting snow combined with wind chills as low as 60 below zero to make life miserable.
You're lucky if you could see 10, 15 feet in front of your car.
Blinding conditions forced the cancellation of airline flights for days and sent drivers indoors.
The decider to get me to come off the road was when I came through a whiteout and there was a Jeep Cherokee stopped in the middle of the travel portion of the road because they got scared by the whiteout.
In Michigan, snow and ice caused a multi-car pileup. Wave after wave of Arctic air has not only taxed people's patience, it's also depleted resources that are supposed to last all winter.
The town of Waukesha has used its entire allocation of salt for the 2013-2014 season.
Energy experts say the average household will pay nearly $1,000 in heating costs this winter. That's 10% above normal. But if the polar weather persists, those numbers could go higher. This time of year in coastal Virginia, residents can normally expect an occasional day or two in the 70s. But this winter, the snow hasn't even melted from last week's storm, when already forecasters are calling for more snow and plunging temperatures. Still, not everyone's complaining. In Columbus, Ohio, the neighbors help each other with snow removal. And even the kids fight cabin fever by grabbing a shovel.
It's a group effort, and it's a lot easier when you have help.
And despite a lack of snow and too much ice and cold, participants seem to enjoy the Mush Bowl dog sledding races in Maine. John Waggy, CBN News.
And for more on just how cold it will get, we turn now to AccuWeather's Andrew Baglini.
Arctic air straight from the North Pole being dumped in across the United States. The clouds paint the picture. You can see where this Arctic air mass is. Here's the frontal boundary coming into the lower Midwest, Ohio Valley, and all the way up into New England. And that's where the core of the cold is across the north. Two major concerns with this air mass. Number one, the unbearable cold across the north. This is a dangerously cold air mass. Overnight lows dipping well below zero, but then you factor in the wind, and it's going to be feeling like it's minus 40 at times around Green Bay, Duluth, Minneapolis, minus 30 around Detroit, and across New England, feeling like it's minus 20 if you're heading out in the early morning hours, feeling like it's zero down into the Carolinas. Now, this cold setting the stage for a major winter storm in the southeast. Don't get a lot of these across the region, and it's going to be bad across the I-10 for travelers. Icy mix, sleet and freezing rain as we head into Tuesday morning into the afternoon. Some snow around I-20 just south and east of Atlanta. Some heavy accumulations along the I-95, I-20 interchange.
And for more on this cold weather, we turn now to Weather Bell's Joe Bastardi. Joe, this is the second huge blast of cold air the country has seen. Can we expect more this winter?
Yes, this is going to continue. Now, along the eastern seaboard, the relative constant pounding of cold that we would have had once we end the month, the last 10 days or so, that's going to let up. We're going to go back and forth. You folks, they're going to get this snowstorm, and we're going to see a snowstorm from Savannah all the way up to the tidewater of Virginia. You're liable to be hitting 60 or 70 degrees this weekend as it warms up. So there is some warmer feeling to Mother Nature here, but most of the country is going to have a frigid February. It'll be centered over the center part of the United States, and lots of storminess and lots of snow and cold for the United States. It's going to be the coldest winter probably since the winters in the late 70s.
What would you say is behind all this cold weather?
We had a very similar sea surface temperature in the Pacific Ocean. In fact, it almost looks the same. I tweet it every once in a while on my Twitter site, and we put it on Weather Bell all the time, saying if you had the same thing going on then, why would you expect a different answer now? And that's basically what's going on. This is nothing new. For instance, people are making a big deal. Well, it's cold in the United States, but look how warm it is in Alaska, right? Yeah, well, 1977, January 77, one of the coldest Januaries on record, it was very warm in Alaska. It was actually warmer in Greenland than it is this year. The entire Arctic was warm, and we had record high Arctic sea ice at that time. So those other excuses, and that's what they are, excuses, don't carry weight when you actually look at the reality of the past.
Well, some scientists say that the wild weather points to climate change. Any truth in that, Joe?
Well, let's put it this way. If there was a route going on by warming, okay, and the climate's always changing. You see, what they did was they simply co-opted the obvious. The climate is never the same. We've had glaciers all the way down to New York City. You don't see any glaciers in New York City now, do you? But what happens is that the back and forth, when it gets extreme, is usually a sign it's cooling. Why? Because when the weather is warm all over the place, there's not much fighting going on. And indeed, if you're going to make that argument, the argument is, and it's backed up by the data, that we are beginning to cool, which makes sense since the Pacific is going into its colder mode, and the Atlantic will be going into its colder mode in the next 10 to 15 years. I fully expect a return to the weather more common for the 60s and 70s in the coming decade.
Okay, Joe Bastardi of Weather Bell, thanks for your time, sir.
Oh, thanks for having me, and enjoy the weather. It's the only weather you got.
Moving overseas now, the United States is resuming non-lethal aid to the Syrian opposition. U.S. officials say equipment such as communications gear and laptops are being delivered to non-armed opposition groups only. The aid is being sent through Turkey, and delivery is being coordinated by the Free Syrian Army. Officials say security has been improved to ensure future deliveries reach only intended targets. The decision comes after goods seized in December by al-Qaeda-linked militants were returned to the Free Syrian Army's Supreme Military Council. Opposition and Syrian leaders met today to begin negotiations on a transitional government. The meeting broke up after less than an hour. The opposition says Syrian President Bashar Assad has to step down. Regime officials say that won't happen. Over the weekend, face-to-face talks did lead to an agreement, however, over humanitarian aid. But at this point, no actual progress has taken place on the ground.
As of today, until now, there is no progress in the humanitarian corridors. The city of Homs, the old city of Homs, is still under starvation siege. And there is no progress also in the releasing of the prisoners.
Meanwhile, the group in charge of ridding the country of chemical weapons says a second batch of toxic chemicals has been removed from the country. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons is set to remove all toxins by mid-2014. Today marks International Holocaust Remembrance Day. It commemorates the horrors of World War II when the Nazis tried to exterminate the Jewish people from the earth. And Israelis are making sure the world remembers. Chris Mitchell has that story from Jerusalem.
6 million Jews died in the Holocaust, and each one has a story.
When we came into Bergen-Belsen, just the way my father predicted, I never saw my father again. But just the way he predicted, we had to get undressed to go into the showers. And I was holding on tightly to my pictures.
A German soldier tore up those pictures, but Rena survived the Holocaust.
Something happened that day that never happened before. People who never walked faster than a snail's pace were running, and people who never spoke a whisper were shouting. And new soldiers came in wearing different uniforms, and everybody kept on saying, "You're free, you're free."
Nearly 70 years after the Holocaust, survivors are dying at an alarming rate, nearly one every hour. That's why many are trying to preserve the memory of the Holocaust for the next generation. One way to preserve that memory is what the Israeli Knesset is doing. For the first time in its history, more than half of the Knesset members will travel to Auschwitz in Poland to commemorate the day. They will join Holocaust survivors, world leaders, and members of the U.S. Congress. Auschwitz is the most infamous of the Nazi death camps. More than 1 million Jews died in that camp. 69 years ago, British forces liberated it. The event with the Knesset members is part of a program called From the Depths. From the Depths comes from the book of Psalms, chapter 130, verse 1. From the depths, I call out to you. The organization's goal is to take a strong stand against the growing anti-Semitism in the world and serve as one more reminder of the cry after the Holocaust, never again. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
It's so important to remember. In other news, Egypt is set to hold an early presidential election. That's a change to a former plan to have parliamentary elections first. It opens the door for current Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to quickly become the next president. The early election announcement comes after growing unrest in Egypt. This weekend marked the third anniversary of the Arab Spring uprising there. Violent protests left at least 50 dead. The early election will likely deepen tensions between government supporters and those who back the Muslim Brotherhood. The voting is expected to take place in April. Political protests in Ukraine could quickly be turning into a revolution. Angry demonstrators have moved from the streets of Kiev into the building where the Justice Ministry is housed, leading officials to threaten to issue a state of emergency. But as Caitlin Burke reports, the people are holding their ground.
The people of Ukraine have had enough with their government, and they're done negotiating.
We aren't expecting, we are demanding the resignation of the government and are calling for new presidential elections and a change in the system overall.
On Sunday night, protesters overtook Ukraine's Justice Ministry after opposition leaders rejected an offer to share power by President Viktor Yanukovych. Protesters now occupy 4 buildings in Kiev, and Ukraine's justice minister says she will declare a state of emergency if they don't retreat.
I, as part of an operation group to deal with the situation at hand, will have to advise the President of Ukraine to stop the negotiations process until the Ministry of Justice is completely emptied, because negotiations are happening in a peaceful way. I will also have to discuss with my colleagues the introduction of a state of emergency.
A state of emergency could make things much worse. Protesters have already clashed repeatedly with police over the past few weeks, leading to 3 deaths. Now unrest is spreading from the capital throughout the country. Violent clashes breaking out in 2 other major cities over the weekend. Protesters are angry with the way Yanukovych is steering the country away from ties with the West and towards Russia.
We hope that our government will finally make the right choice, that they will stop this mess and relinquish their power, because there is no way forward for them.
Fears were heightened when Yanukovych forced through anti-protest laws, imposing on the rights of free speech and assembly. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
At least 75 people have been killed in a bombing today in Nigeria. Authorities there blame the Islamic extremist group Boko Haram. They say more than 50 people planted bombs and attacked a market in a village in Borno, Nigeria. The blast also destroyed over 300 homes nearby. Boko Haram has yet to claim responsibility for the attack, but the terror group is blamed for thousands of deaths in the region over the past few years. Coming up, getting the flu on purpose. Why some people are being paid big bucks to be infected. Welcome back. A big win for religious groups challenging the contraception mandate in the president's health care plan. The Supreme Court has issued an injunction protecting the Little Sisters of the Poor from having to provide contraceptive coverage. The injunction will hold until an appeals court rules on their suit. Justice Sonia Sotomayor issued the order. It also covers 400 other Catholic organizations that receive health benefits from the same Catholic provider. The court says the groups only have to inform the Department of Health and Human Services of their religious identity and objections. The flu could soon hit northeast parts of the country especially hard. Even though this year's season has peaked, plenty of weeks remain, and the high levels of cases that have been seen in the south are making their way up north. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says 41 states are reporting widespread flu outbreaks. The main strain of the flu this season is H1N1. The CDC says young adults are particularly vulnerable to this outbreak. While most people try to avoid the flu, some are getting paid thousands of dollars to get it. A government study is paying people $3,000 each to become infected with influenza. They are researching why some are more immune to the flu, even with a vaccine. Volunteers are kept in isolation and their symptoms are checked on a daily basis.
I experienced a little head congestion, sinus pressure.
We can look at people, their immune system, and the flu and understand those interactions so that hopefully we can learn new information that could help us improve vaccines in the future.
Researchers are hoping to conduct the study on up to 100 people over the next year. The health of Christian singer Carmen seems to be in decline. The famous musician has been battling cancer for almost a year. And in an emergency update on Facebook, he says a new infection could be threatening his life, saying that for the first time, he's, quote, really worried. To see his full post and share how his music has impacted your life, visit our Facebook page. You'll find a link at our website, cbnnews.com. Up next, a shocking look at sex trafficking and how one group is working to raise awareness. More than 1 million children are sold into human trafficking each year. It's a multi-billion-dollar global industry that forces many into sexual slavery. Now, a Montana-based ministry is releasing a documentary to raise awareness about sexual exploitation in Asia. Gary Lane has the story in tonight's Focus Report.
Great Britain and the United States may have abolished slavery more than 150 years ago, but today human enslavement and sexual trafficking is widespread. It's now affecting 160 countries worldwide. Trafficked, A Hope in the Dark is a new documentary produced by the Montana-based ministry Vision Beyond Borders. It details sexual trafficking in Nepal and India. Patrick Klein is executive producer.
If you're a prostitute, a lot of times you choose that lifestyle and you make income from it. But these girls are not prostitutes. They're not choosing this lifestyle. They've been forced into this lifestyle. They've been sold as slaves. I would say the girls on the streets are young as probably 15, 16 years old, but we've heard stories of even 5-year-old girls being taken from the villages. Sometimes they'll actually be sold by their own family members.
Filmmaker Jennings Barmore says the market for young girls is growing at brothels.
It seemed like their sell line every time was young girls, young girls, and that was the way they tried to pull you in, and just how perverse things have become to where the selling point of getting men in here is, younger girls.
That's good girl, young girl.
For sex?
Yeah, you get here in the house, and the rooms also available there. 45 minutes, air-conditioned room, and you get all things there. Facility, young girl.
Butter was 15 when a friendly man offered her a job. She accompanied him to a movie theater where he drugged her. She fell unconscious and later awoke in a Mumbai brothel. Butter could not escape because she was never left alone. Vision Beyond Borders worker Debbie Che said sex workers never get a break from their degrading lives. If they don't keep up their quota, they and even their children will pay a price.
I heard that they're told if you don't get a customer today, you won't eat.
Wow.
And that was really shocking. Or, if you don't cooperate, we're going to hurt your child. And so even their motherhood is violated.
Some are denied the chance to experience the joy of motherhood. Patrick Klein says he's witnessed a new development in Kathmandu, Nepal.
We're seeing abortion clinics coming up all over the place providing free abortion services.
Is that cultural for them to allow abortion?
I don't think it's cultural at all, and especially a culture that's very family-based. But it seems like they're finding this is supposedly the solution to these women becoming impregnated, so let's just abort the baby, and you can keep going on doing what you're doing.
So what is the solution to help rescue women, children, and others from sexual enslavement? Klein says people need to become aware of the problem. That's why he produced the Trafficked documentary. He also says prayer can make a difference.
When Christians begin to pray and cry out to God, we see God working. The powerful thing in this documentary is to transform life. When these girls come to know Jesus as their Lord and Savior, they find forgiveness for their own sins, but they're able to forgive the men and women that have used them.
And what about Badr? She was enslaved for 15 years, but gained freedom after some Christians introduced the brothel owner to Christ. Badr eventually returned to her home village, where she was shunned by neighbors. Klein hopes his documentary will motivate Christians to get involved, to help young women like Badr.
I think when we see individual people and hear these women's stories, that all of a sudden they become a human being, and that we also have a responsibility to do something to help them.
Badr eventually fled to another Asian country. A Christian woman named Deepa helped her transition into a new life, one free from sexual enslavement. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Up next, how CBN is working to bring positive values to TV programs in Asia. The executive producer of the 700 Club Asia has received an award recognizing the show's promotion of positive values in TV programming. Kata Inocencio was given the Anak TV Seal Award. It's the symbol of child-sensitive, family-friendly television in the Philippines. It's based on the Filipino people's choice for programs appropriate for the entire family. This is the second time the award has been given to the 700 Club Asia. That's wonderful, and we have programs like that all over the world. Well, that's all for this edition of NewsWatch. Remember, you can email us your comments and questions at newswatch@cbn.com. Hope you'll join us next time. Have a great night.